Okay. So what did you guys think about the film?
I guess if I go in order with the first question, anything that I found surprising about the sexual behavior slash fantasies beliefs from the culture that I've explored, that is not as different in a lot of ways than a lot of Western cultures in the sense that there's um like misogyny or just like the male very it's very similar here in the US. It just may be manifested differently than it is here. Like it just shows differently. I don't know if that makes sense, but or if you
Yeah.
know what I'm trying to say, but yeah.
No, I definitely agree. I found it super surprising, like you said, not because they're different from Western countries, like they are, but the root of it is the same with the whole
Hmm.
misogyny and the patriarchy affecting the society. But I think it's really interesting to see how it um, how it portrays in a society that's so religious,
Hmm.
and there's so many different religions, and I think it's so surprising to find how common it is to see in such a society that's so religious, because it's here in the western states it's more certain areas are like that, but like we know like California is it's very blue, it's very liberal, it's not very like that, but certain areas are. But I think it's super interesting that in such a religious area and society that there can be such a dramatic effect for women. I don't know.
I
Yeah. Oh,
oh.
go ahead.
I would just wanted to also make a comment on that. I found that really interesting how, preaching Christianity, but then having like these cultural views around it, or like how I don't know how to word it, but you would think like, oh, for coming from such a religious background and Christianity, like these types of behaviors are like okay, as opposed to here, like, and having a religious background like Christianity, it might not be as so accepting in that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it kind of just shows how much like colonization has affected um, Ghana, and I think like it kind of shows like how traditional views in Ghana have like mixed with these new colonized views, um, and it's like it's just really interesting to see how it like mixes together, and like how Natalie says like it's such a male dominated culture, and it's like crazy to see how like it's so common for like men to have a wife, but for them to have a mistress and for them to have a girlfriend too.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think it's and the way she interviewed so many different women and how they talked about it in their own different perspective was really interesting too. And like you said, how things are changing when it comes to like how things are like being more modern. And um I think I noticed a one thing about how it's super similar to Western countries is how there's always that one, not one, but there's people in the media that always have opposing views. And I think like the singer that they mentioned and like the people who were in the two women who were in the shows were talking about how they talked about a lot of controversial perspectives. And I think that's super crazy how similar it is to the Western states. It's always people, big people in media that talk about it, but not really like civilians, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah, and like I don't know if you, I don't remember her name, but the girl that was enslaved at like towards the end, she came up in the film.
Hmm.
Oh yeah, the younger girl from the village.
Yeah, it was really interesting because she made a comment about how like we like they shouldn't go back into African traditions because of how much like inequality that there was, and that we should appreciate like Christianity instead. And
Mm-hmm.
then like the singer had a completely different view.
Yeah, and she talked about how she really wanted to get more into like the roots of their culture and how a lot of people in society view it as like demonic or something. And I think it's crazy because it's so modern to the point where they can think that it's different, like it's bad and it's demonic, but it it's like deeply rooted in their own culture, but they're so modernized by or so influenced by religion that they view it so differently. And I think it's so interesting how it's like that in Ghana and compared to here in the US.
Well, I think her case will, because of the fact that she went through, I don't remember exactly what like happened to her, but you know how she would have been raped, if she wouldn't have quote unquote been rescued, quote unquote, by someone in the US. I think that should be something to consider in terms of her reality at the time and as to why she kind of demonized it or took a completely 360 and didn't want to or like everything that happened in her country or it was associated as like a culture thing in terms of her culture more rather than trying to see, because from what I saw she turned a 360 in terms that she uh, used Christianity or religion as like her savior, and I don't know if like I would say that's a good thing just because I feel like it can be problematic in the sense that that's something that we see in a lot of other countries that were um, susceptible to colonialism and imperialism and all of that, and the people who tend to go after religion or they practice that religion, it's always demonized like pre other cultures or stuff that they originally created. So like the other person who was there who had like her own podcast or something, who would embrace her culture and all of that. So I think it's a big contrast, because based off of her like negative situation, which I don't know how to word it, but I think like I wouldn't say like what happened to her. Of course, like all of that was like really bad, and it's not, I don't want to individualize her case either. It's just that it was one case that they showed us of, but it's more so um she basically, like what happened to her, it's something of course that can hope happen in a lot of like third world countries, or like differently, more like overtly rather than like in the US where it's like more covert. And so that's why maybe she sees her own culture in like a negative light, as in a negative way, if that makes sense.
No, that totally.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'll just agree.
Oh, yeah, totally. I get that. And it makes me like, I feel like they didn't really go over too much about like what like traditional African cultures were. And I'm sure like Ghana has multiple different cultures within it just because, with colonization, everything was grouped so differently. And like, it makes me wonder how like inequalities and how gender dynamics were traditionally before colonization. Um, because I think that's an important aspect to talk about too. And I feel like, not gonna lie, I feel like kind of like the film kind of demonizes African culture in a way because with the singer too, like the part that they showed about the voodoo religion is that they were like killing the chickens.
Yep.
And like for people here who are watching that, they're gonna think that's like super taboo.
Yeah, or they're gonna just look down. Well, I feel like that's such a Western like take on like everything, where anything that's not, our norm here in the States, then a lot of Americans or people will kind of shun other cultures and how they go about things. So I think I definitely agree with that, because I forgot my train of thought, but someone else can start talking. I'll remember.
Hi guys. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Hi.
Uh, I just wanted to stay on that point too. I think the new norm of the transition of just even here in the roots of America itself, Central, South, and North America, the Native Americans that were on this land, they had traditions that have been completely wiped out. And I think that it's been in a way that's been pushed and segregated out. If we go to, because here I know most of us are in California, we just normally see, the basic Native Americans, they don't really express themselves how they would naturally would. But if we go to Nevada or places like Montana where they're really segregated, you really see an essence of culture like that. And they also have this hierarchy of speaking to the chief. And in those kind of cultures as well, there is this ideology of where children are given to the chief in order for respect and for the chief to acknowledge womanhood and fatherhood of both. And it's very weird to say that, but it's something that's been blind to us because it's not really shown. You know what I mean? It's more of now like industrialized, of where every culture has to be really predominant in its own like industry. Like Catholic are very predominant in here, and Christianity. But if you really go down the street and if you see somebody that's with the religion, like let's say Hebrew, that have their, specific gown and everything, or even have any other kind of religion, it's really weird because you don't really see that, and people really say negative comments about that. And it's very sad to see that, because when you explore different areas, like how we saw in the video in Accra, it's in a way it's beautiful because they're still sticking with the traditions, but we see it as bad because we see that from an American point of view.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's definitely, especially with the film, it's filming towards like in the view of how the Western perspective. So of course they're going to show all these dramatic things, and to us, it's very different. It's a bit gruesome or whatnot, but it's been hidden from us. All the news and articles and stuff we read and stuff we even learn at school, a lot of it is kind of not dumbed down, but kind of watered down for us to learn. And it doesn't truly encapsulate what their culture is until we actually see it. And then we have all these different opinions, like it's too much, it's too crazy or whatnot, but we just have been blind about it this whole time because of the society we grew up in, like Anthony said.
Do you guys think the host is ethnocentric and or judgmental in her questioning? I feel like I noticed, maybe not necessarily directly, but more so like in a passive aggressive way. I could see in certain of the clips where she maybe would ask a lot of the people in the town about like their views about something, and she would kind of question it like, oh, and you don't see anything wrong with it or stuff like that. I don't know if I would say I guess that's up to interpretation, of course, to like the viewer, but I don't know if I would say she is like she was trying, like she was completely unbiased. Like I think there was some bias that you could tell from the way that she was interviewing the people there.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that even with just the first woman that she interviewed. It was almost like she was questioning.
Like her morals or something.
Yeah, because like she was asking her like what is the norm here? What is the norm in your society? Why is it like this? And she kept kind of asking her like, how do you feel about it? Like, do you think it's right? Like isn't that unfair for you? And it's kind of like, well, I'm just kind of explaining to you my experience and my story. And it did, like Natalie like said, it does seem judgmental. Like her tone definitely seemed judgmental. And I don't know if it was just her tone, but you're right, it was definitely like, it was very passive aggressive when she would ask questions and stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna agree. I was just agreeing. Like I think that it had a lot. I think it did have a lot to do with the tone and the way she reacted, acting very surprised. And both of the women actually had to reassure her in that first interview, explaining. I felt like they were going in circles, but telling, like, saying that this is how. This is what this is what is normalized in our country. Like it's okay. Yes, that he has a wife and that I am the mistress and the girlfriend. It's okay because she felt like it was okay because that was normal, but she was just so shocked, her facial expressions and just those comments that were being made. I just wanted to go ahead and agree with you.
And I think it's honestly kind of surprising that she made those she didn't really it was surprising she made those reactions, just because it wasn't the first time that she had spoken to people from Accra. She had been there before. She had said that she had done a documentary before, like 7 years ago, before that time that it was filmed for this film. So I was just kind of surprised that she didn't really that she was still speaking to locals like that, because that wasn't her first time there. you know?
Yeah, exactly. And like she's had so many other films, and I'm sure she's traveled to so many countries and interacted with so many people that you would think that she wouldn't be as like judgmental, because like having exposure to so many, like a diverse group of people,
Yeah.
it really does like make you question like, damn, like is what I think right? Like should I really be thinking that what I grew up with is the standard I should judge things?
Yeah. I think it's so wild to see that someone who has so much experience with travel and working with so many different diverse groups of people and different cultures, that she can ask such passive aggressive questions,
Mm-hmm.
even towards people who are older than her.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it was just kind of interesting and kind of a little bit disrespectful, just because they talked a lot about respect in Accra to in Ghana too. And I think it was really interesting how she would interview these people, talk about respect, but not really give the same respect that she was given.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I totally see that.
Natalie added in the chat that we don't normalize multiple partners here, but they do over there. And I would kind of like argue a little bit. I think we do normalize multiple partners, but in a different way. In the sense, like, it's very similar how here we kind of expect men to be very sexually active and have like multiple, like a huge body count basically. And women here aren't expected to do the same. They're expected to be sexual, but also a little prudish, you know?
Yeah.
That makes sense. And it's kind of like the same over there. They're expecting women to be a man's mistress, but she can't cheat on her husband like the men over there can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found it super interesting, especially if you guys remember the scene of that guy. I think he was like a sailor, I think. But when the lady, the host, interviewed him, and he was saying how no, like he didn't cheat on his wife, or like he only has one, and the main reason that they stated was because of status or like having money. And I feel like that's more of like a more direct way that that he was, pretty much honest. And maybe one could say like a lot of men who might not have as much money and in a similar position as him in Accra would probably say something similar as he has. And that's what I meant earlier in terms of like here in Accra, it seems to be like misogyny seems to be a little bit more overt, versus right here in the US and like in more westernized countries, it's more covert, where the men, you can see that a lot of them have a lot of these views as well, but they don't necessarily like vocalize it, or they won't necessarily like relate it back to directly like with money. But at the end of the day, certain men, if they reach a certain level of like social capital or like cultural capital, whatever you want to I guess equate with like money, they would have more so of an entitlement of like, oh, okay, I can get more women, like if we want to include also like their looks, or et cetera, et cetera. It's just kind of done so differently here in the US, but they pretty much have a lot of similarities in how they view women as just like a commodity for them. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Carla added in the comment section, she said, I was going to add, even when she interviews the gentleman, she was so aggressive in her way of communicating her interviews that men hardly wanted to present their perspective. Totally true.
Yeah, in other words of saying that, like, we were talking about, it was hard, the way that she was asking those questions, how they came off so aggressive. But if you realized, it took her a while to even find a man to give out their point of view. I think she even mentioned it like really quick before that scene at the wharf with that guy. She was like, "Oh, I had a hard time finding a male to gain a point of perspective," and I think that's what she mentioned. I'm not too sure, but I just felt like it was hard to get a point of view from a gentleman.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting, in my opinion, when she was interviewing the woman in the nail salon. She was talking about how even though the women in Ghana don't, some do like being part of like a married family, like being a mistress to a man who's married. But a lot of women, she was saying, a lot of women don't really like it, but they do it just because it's really difficult for women to sustain themselves in Ghana. And I think she said that there, in order to buy an apartment or lease an apartment or whatnot, they have to pay for like two years or something in advance. And I think that it's really interesting to learn that although of course, in our perspective, it's not good or not normal to have a relationship with someone who's married, but I think in their perspective, you can't not, and I think that's something that's so different from the Western states because we're so big on like being independent and that women are strong and we can do what we need to do by ourselves. And I totally believe in that. But I think it's really interesting to see that in that society, it's just impossible that they need help from like a man. And I don't know how I would feel like being in that perspective. I think it's really crazy to think about.
Yeah, it is really crazy. I was like kind of surprised when I saw that, especially like with you have to like pay your apartment 2 years in advance, which I thought
Yeah.
was like insane.
Like, how is that even doable?
Yeah, and like I think that also makes sense as to why like the sailor, he was saying that the men who tend to have more partners tend to be rich. And
Yeah.
so that makes sense because they're helping the women like be able to sustain themselves. Um, and I kind of wish she wasn't like so aggressive with her questions, but I feel like if she wasn't so aggressive, she probably would have been able to get more perspectives and opinions. And it would have been really great to see more of the men's perspectives on this and like to see what they think and like their experiences with all this.
Yeah.
Did you notice how the women that supported themselves are usually alone? Like that lady who was doing she owned that business with the fishing, and she like
Mm-hmm.
was all by herself, like no help whatsoever. Or even the lady who, I even felt like the lady who was well off, who owned a lot of what she had a lot of jewelry, she was dressed well. She was saying that she, like, number one is always keeping her man satisfied. So they still kind of go back to pleasing the men, but in some way she's still like considered like independent and has to like keep up with that, like well, what is it, she has to keep up with like the, how do I say it, keep up with that standard, right, as a woman.
Yeah.
Like it's never not okay to, be like basically on top, or to look a certain, present yourself a certain way, um either that's sexually or just by the way that you look.
Yeah, and I think it was the head of the church. I don't remember his name, but she interviewed him, and he was talking to him about how um, even like you were saying, even though she was independent, she still talked about how she like her priority was like keeping her man satisfied. And he was talking about how he was like in Ghana or in Accra, it's it's known that you're supposed to take care of a man. Like you are successful because you have fully like taken care of a man. That you can do everything for him and support him in every aspect of his life, and that is deemed as like successful. And you are a good woman in society as that. And although she's trying to push more progressive views, it still goes back to that. And I think it's really interesting because she's kind of in the middle, in my opinion. I think it's really cool to see all these different ideologies emerging as things go on.
I think to answer number 5, like what else what I'd like to know more about, like the sexual culture that maybe they didn't talk to as much, goes back to what you guys were just saying about getting the men's perspective. But I would want to know more. So I think in one of the clips they showed a show where the woman was asking, I think I don't know if it was her partner or not, but the a potential sexual partner, where they were asking them if they could go down on them, like, why wouldn't you go down on me? And then they said it's like not a Ghanaian men thing to go down on women. And I guess I would have liked to see that perspective more so from like other men to be interviewed and see like why they wouldn't do that. Although my assumption, I mean, like of course with when they talk to like the Pope, I think, and I guess the whole, if we kind of try and see it with a bird's eye perspective, I would assume it comes back down to the whole power thing of like men receiving and like them being the ones in power, and like not having women, not doing that to women would mean that they would have to like give away some of their power, I guess. But I guess I would have liked to hear that more from like other male perspectives interviewed, I guess.
Yeah, I think that would have been really interesting to see. And I think also like what you were saying about the bird's eye view thing to consider, since like for a lot of women, like sex was the exchange for having like an apartment or being able to afford things. I wonder if men saw that as the exchange too, where it was like they were receiving pleasure for themselves and just giving women the money, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it just makes me curious about that.
Yeah, that's actually a super interesting perspective. I didn't think about that.
I think also from the guy's perspective, I've noticed that because when I go to South America as well, I traveled there, and I've noticed as well that there's a cultural norm of of men being having that idea of younger women attracted to them, or having like the issuance of payment to a woman for that. And I've noticed that it's very not strange, but it's very weird in that these men use that as like they use that as leverage against their fellow peers, like other guys. Because it's weird, like when you go and a guy speaks to that, oh, like they compete with each other on whether like, oh, where this person's from, or like what age she was. So I think that's one of the most disturbing ways too, and one of the most weird ways that people, like men especially, have been,
Wired.
viewing. What was that?
Oh, sorry, I said like wired to operate in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like because it's if we were to say we were all men, right, and we were like speaking about these discrepancies about having relationships with women, it's so you would hear oh, I had it with this one and she was this young, or it was with this person from this culture, so I think in a way men are utilizing this kind of procedure to use to, one, exploit their fantasies, two, to leverage against other males to become this alpha male, and to increase their ego. Because I mean, a man that had, like in the video, that was in a way to be said like a peasant, he was happy, he was completely loved with his wife. And what I noticed is that he said, oh, I'm not rich. So I found it very unique in that if you don't have that wealth, your ego isn't boosted up. So they utilize women to like leverage against their alpha males in a way.
Yeah, I think those are some very like interesting and like good points to mention. I like to think though that at least in my experience, I feel like I wouldn't say just necessarily in Accra and like or like in South America. I've seen it here in the US too. Like personally, I've had experiences where males have done that to me before, and I've seen it like just in action. So I think it's definitely embedded everywhere, but it's definitely more prominent in different areas for sure.
Yeah. So the last question, how does what you learned so far in class help you make sense of what you learned? Personally, I kind of drew back a lot from the Sex and Power article we read in module 2, or the last module. It just talked a lot about how the patriarchy has framed this image of woman as property, and it also like discussed that in the film. And I think many women in Ghana feel as if they're second class citizens, and they said that in the film. And it's because of the way the patriarchy has framed their society and how it's stripped so many like women of their freedoms. And it kind of made me understand how expansive the patriarchy is in almost every single community, but it's portrayed in such different ways. And I think it was really interesting to learn about it in a society that was extremely religious. But that's what I kind of drew back on when it comes to like what I learned in class.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have anything else to add?
Well, I just had a quick question for you guys. What do you guys think if the narrator, not the narrator, but the interview person, the interviewer, were to be male rather than female? Do you think that approach would have been different?
Oh, for sure, definitely. I think that would have maybe the responses we got from the woman probably wouldn't have been the same. I think there would have been like a skew for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Because I was thinking, oh, sorry to cut you guys off, but I think it was very interesting that I think how you guys are stating how being female to female has a higher connection and gave more acceptance. Because even she was, it seemed to me personally, she was very like they gave so much trust to her to like even walk through certain areas. You know what I mean? Like I wouldn't like in the video that I saw her at a bar. As I wouldn't really see a female being in that bar. Just because of that situation. So I thought it was very unique like that too.
Yeah, I think it's like in a sense of a way she can relate to her in that perspective where it's like um, coming from a society that it's not feminism is not very like highly talked about. So I think she went there to talk to these women and kind of get their perspective. So I think it kind of created a sense of not comfort but trust between those two. And I don't think that it would definitely not be the same if there was a male interviewer. Yeah. But if there's anything else you guys would like to add, go for it. If not, I can end this. But all right, I'll end this.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.